Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Ripped from the Headlines on April 29th, 2025. We are on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, first day of Iyar, and this is our Yom HaAtzmaut edition. Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, is celebrated on the 5th of Iyar, except when it's not, and that was a topic that we've discussed previously. How in order to ensure that Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Memorial Independence Days, don't slide into or from Shabbat, and to avoid any potential need for people to travel or violate Shabbos in any way, either preparing or going home from those events, we ensure that Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut are never commemorated or celebrated on a Thursday or Friday. Yom HaZikaron on Thursday, Yom HaAtzmaut on Friday. So we'll be commemorating Yom HaZikaron on Wednesday and Yom HaAtzmaut on Thursday. And today we will address the mitzvah to vote in the World Zionist Congress elections. I hope everyone here has already voted. And if not, the short answer is that there is a mitzvah to vote. And it's a very simple, easy place to go to vote if you haven't already. It's voteoic.org. It's going to be in the chat for those who want to just get there. You can even do it while I'll even forgive you for multitasking if you want, and you want to vote while we're studying. This is something that has hopefully caught your attention. Although a couple of I guess it may have actually been last Tuesday, we had some representatives from the Mizrahi slate at Minyan, and I asked who had voted, and sadly, there was only one other person and me. It's not like there were 1,000 people at Minyan, but we were able to get everyone to vote then as well. You've probably heard about it. We've been promoting it in our shul. I imagine other congregations have as well. And let's see what it's all about. So there are elections taking place. There are elections every 5 years. Source number one from the American Zionist Movement's website. Between March 10th and May 4th, 2025, American Jews will vote for their delegates to the 39th World Zionist Congress, the Parliament of the Jewish People, which will convene in Jerusalem in October 2025. Voting in the election is the most powerful opportunity to have your voice heard in Israel, make an impact on the Jewish communities worldwide, and stand up for Zionism. The representatives who are elected, with 1/3 of them coming from the United States, will make key decisions and allocating over $1 billion annually to support the most pressing needs across Israeli society and the diaspora. The elected delegates include 152 who fill American seats within the Congress. The larger the voter turnout, the more the American Jewish voice is heard. So that's how it pertains to us. The rest of the Congress is filled out by Israelis from the different parties in the Knesset, as well as other delegates from other diaspora Jewish communities, Europe, South Africa, and the like. But this is our chance to have our voices heard as part of the Zionist enterprise. And there's money involved. So if there's money involved, there's going to be politics involved. But essentially, and really where we're going to begin our conversation about this is in terms of, what are the requirements to vote? So you have to be 18 years old. You have to have not voted in the most recent Israeli election, right? Being an American citizen, you may have dual citizenship. If you live in Israel and vote in the last election, you can't vote. And you have to agree with the Jerusalem program of the World Zionist Organization. And I refer you to the websites for more background history, but essentially the World Zionist Organization was founded by Theodor Herzl back in 1897 at the First World Zionist Congress, and that's where all of this effort has its origins. And the idea being, if you want to participate, you have to agree with the Jerusalem program of the WZO. So what is the Jerusalem program of the WZO? Let's see how complex it is. And what a person has to affirm that they are agreeing with in order to be eligible to vote. So, source number two, the unity of the Jewish people, its bond to its historic homeland, Eretz Yisrael, and the centrality of the state of Israel and Jerusalem, its capital, and the life of the nation. Aliyah to Israel. strengthening Israel as a Jewish, Zionist, democratic state and shaping it as an exemplary society with a unique moral and spiritual character, marked by mutual respect for the multifaceted Jewish people, rooted in the vision of the prophets, striving for peace and contributing to the betterment of the world. Ensuring the future and distinctiveness of the Jewish people by furthering Jewish, Hebrew, and Zionist education. Nurturing mutual Jewish responsibility, defending the rights of Jews as individuals and as a nation, representing national Zionist interests of the Jewish people, struggling against all manifestations of anti-Semitism. Settling the country as an expression of practical Zionism. Encouraging recruitment and service in the Israel Defense Forces and security forces, and strengthening them as a protective force of the Jewish people living in Zion, as well as encouraging full national service for anyone exempted in law from service in the IDF. So if you were following along or reading along and noticing that there's certain vagaries or certain categories that seem to be more focused, or certain concepts that seem to be included because they're important to some groups and more than others, correct. This whole program was meant to be as inclusive as possible. There's a lot of, in addition, the idea of historic homeland Eretz Yisrael, the idea of Aliyah, important to some and to others, the idea of the Zionist and democratic character of the state of Israel is more important to some groups more than others, the idea of mutual Jewish responsibility and the different groups of Jews and different approaches to Judaism, settling the country, also is important to some more certain parties more than others. And it's not just about Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And then in particular, since it's something that we've spoken about in other classes with regards to national service, you notice that it talks about the IDF as critical, as well as opening up national service for those exempted, because we know that that's definitely something that's in the headlines today in Israel in terms of the Haredi community and their desire for a blanket exemption and the IDF's need for more manpower. But you notice it tries to collect everything together. So in order to vote in this Zionist WZO elections, you have to accept the Jerusalem program. So there are some, more than there's some 20 or so slates that are out there from the different denominations of Judaism have different slates, different denominations within denominations. We're going to focus our conversation today on, within the Orthodox community, who's voting and maybe who's not voting. I think that, many of us would, the Jerusalem program resonates with us. We wouldn't have a program checking off that we agree to vote. But what about, those who are, less inclined? What if you're not a Zionist? What if if Zionism is not such an important part of your Jewishness? So this is something that, the election has drawn more attention, especially in recent years, to try and get the various constituencies to support the priorities of the different slates, and in particular, sometimes from the more ultra-Orthodox communities, the Haredi communities, have recognized that to have a seat at the table, you have to participate in the elections, you have to get votes. The more votes you get, the bigger the seat at the table is. So all of a sudden, in the last elections in 2020, there was a slate. It was called Eretz HaKodesh, the Holy Land, that participated in these elections and wanted to get votes. And I would imagine that many of you have seen pop-up ads online for this, or gotten text messages about this and the like. And all of a sudden, there's a Haredi party looking to be part of the World Zionist Congress. Haredim are generally understood as being Zionists. So how does that work? So we're going to talk a little bit about Zionism and what it means to be a Zionist. We're also going to talk a little bit about what happens if I just want to vote, but I don't want to really accept the program. In particular, this is going to come up by using the example of the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community. I don't necessarily agree. I want to encourage any listener in the IDF, or I don't agree in settling around the country, or I don't agree with whatever the other points are. But let's say, many of us encounter all these times terms of use, right? You have to check accept. How many of us read that? We just check accept. Well, it could be a similar question. What if we don't really accept, but we accept so that we can move forward or get the product or sign up for the endeavor or the like? So there's that component. Does voting in this election make one a Zionist, and theologically and religiously, are there any ramifications? As well as There have been recently some controversies about vote fraud. What about the honesty, integrity of this election, elections in general from a Jewish perspective, voter fraud and the like? What does Judaism have to say about that? I would imagine our instinct is to say it's terrible, but we're going to look at how it gets analyzed, as well as just the idea, the concept of the importance in supporting Israel by voting in Israel will also come up as well. Questions, comments, reactions before we dive into some of these sources? Okay, so we start off with a kol koreh from the Moetzes Gedolei Torah of Agudath Israel of America regarding the WZC elections. The Moetzes Gedolei Torah is the rabbinic leadership of Agudath Yisrael, the more ultra-Orthodox component of the Jewish community. There's one in America, there's one in Israel. So this is the kol koreh, the American rabbis about voting or not voting. In order to vote, source 3, the voter must sign a declaration that he accepts upon himself the Zionist ideology, which does not recognize that the Jewish people is bound by the Torah. He also declares that he encourages participation in the IDF. And those who are exempt must serve in Sherut Leumi, national service. We therefore believe it is forbidden to vote in these elections. We do not intend to impugn the honor of those distinguished rabbis who rule that it is permitted. That's so nice of them. However, our opinion is that there are many isurim involved here, prohibitions. There is a massive chil Hashem in declaring acceptance of the heretical ideas of the WZO. It is obvious that the money hoped to be received from WZO does not justify these serious isurim. So here you have a very direct statement that it's forbidden to vote in these WZO elections for all of these various prohibitions and all these heretical ideas. Now, within the ultra-Orthodox community, it's not unanimous. It's not 100% across. Source number 4 is a picture of a note that was hung outside a base medrash of a yeshiva, where there was no. It's not that they necessarily would email this or put this on the internet because they don't have the website, but it's recommended to vote for Eretz HaKodesh. Al Pi Reb Shimon Yehuda Levi Epstein. This is Yeshiva Har Torah, Rabbi Zelig Epstein's son, and there's a little bit of a comment about, Reb Shimon is aware that this sign and said it should not be taken down. He has confirmed that this is Reb Kalman's opinion on the matter. Like, you can see people here that this Rabbi Kalman Epstein supports the Eretz HaKodesh, so of course there's pushback because the Moetzes Gedolei Torah says you can't vote. So the sign goes up, and some people want to take the sign down, so there now has to be a comment, let's keep the sign up. Right, this is not the only example of this in the more ultra-Orthodox yeshivas. Others have also encouraged voting for Eretz HaKodesh because this Eretz HaKodesh slate is there to push for priorities that are important to the ultra-Orthodox community, and they're not concerned with accepting the Jerusalem program, nor are they concerned with participating. They have self-interest, and the way to have that self-interest met is to vote. Now, from the religious Zionist, the more modern Orthodox community, the YU community. So source number 5 has the YU position as was publicized on the YU website. Source number 5, a vote for the OIC Mizrahi slate. Number 5, the World Zionist Organization elections is a vote to strengthen Torah, support Am Yisrael, uphold our religious and national ideals. With more than $5 billion in funding at stake, now is the time to make your voice heard for Torah, for our values, for Israel. Yeshiva University has long stood at the forefront of religious Zionism, said President Berman. And today in Israel, we need to support Mizrahi, we need to support the religious Zionists, and especially under the leadership of Rabbi Doron Perez. He's a Gibor Yisrael, an Ish Emunah, a true hero, and a leader who embodies our values. It is our zechut to stand behind him in this effort to get out the vote. Rabbi Schachter echoed this call, stressing the urgent need to strengthen and maintain Torah-based leadership in Eretz Yisrael. It is important for Orthodox Jews to vote for the OIC Mizrahi coalition because millions of dollars are at stake, he said. The Orthodox have many institutions in Israel that need support. Yeshiva, mikvah, batei knesset. We send our children to learn there, our children to move there. The more representation we have, the more funding will go to support religious institutions in Eretz Yisrael. So here's a very unequivocal statement from the leadership of Yeshiva University to vote, and to vote for the OIC Mizrahi slate, which has participation from YU and the OU and other Orthodox, modern Orthodox, centrist Orthodox, Young Israel, religious Zionist organizations in America. And if you go to the website, you see that the slate has hundreds of representatives who have signed on, whether it be communal leaders, lay leaders, rabbinic leaders. You'll find the name Eli Weinstock on the slate. You'll find young ambassadors on the slate, student ambassadors. Right? It's a very large undertaking across the board, and there's broad-based support in our community for the OIC Mizrahi coalition, as expressed by Yeshiva University. And in many ways, this extends an approach to Zionism in the state of Israel that Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, a major Torah figure and inspiration of our YU community, inspired. And this is comments from Rabbi Soloveitchik in 1948, soon after the founding of the state of Israel, source number 6. With regard to the redemption of the Shekhinah from defilement, I'm definitely optimistic. Whoever ultimately stands at the helm, life in Israel will, to a certain extent, be completely Jewish. I read in the press that the kitchens of the Israeli army are strictly kosher. When on that fateful Friday, the establishment of the state of Israel was proclaimed, the ceremony was held 8 hours early so as not to desecrate the Sabbath. Despite various logistical difficulties associated with doing this, the act alone sanctified the Sabbath. More than 50 rallies dedicated towards Sabbath observance. Naturally, religious Jewry must stand watch and fight for it. But I can assure everyone that Shabbat in Eretz Yisrael will be holier than it was in the Jewish neighborhood in Berlin, in the Frankfurt Ghetto, or even on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn. I also believe that in Israel, Santa Claus will not have as white a beard, and the radio will not play Silent Night, Holy Night. As a Jew who follows Chazal, in this I can assure all zealots in the exile. The idea that Israel, for whatever flaws, whatever difficulties, and whatever fighting there still has to be to maintain a more traditional religious character, is a positive step, and that's what we have to fight for. Now, in terms of this, for lack of a better term, the modern Orthodox yeshiva world divide on the subject. An interesting figure who has been public about this is part of the Moetzes Gedolei Torah of the Aguda world. His name is Rabbi Aaron Feldman. Rabbi Aaron Feldman is the Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael Yeshiva in Baltimore. Is a tremendous Talmud Chacham and a prolific author who writes incredible works of Jewish thought in English, in addition to all of his Torah scholarship. He has, you can look up some of the books that he has written. And, so, sometimes there may be the stereotype of the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva head as speaking, Yiddish and not English, and not necessarily, communicating, in our in our language or in the same, within the conversation at the same level. Rabbi Feldman, breaks that mold. He's someone who has, a very worldly approach. A couple of the books he has, some of them you've heard, The Juggler and the King, which is about Haggadah, the river, the kettle, and the bird. He's someone who has a lot of Torah to share. At the same time, he's part of the yeshiva world that has a narrower and oppositional view to Zionism. So just, something he would, a quote that came out within the discussion of the 2020 elections, the WZO elections, source 7. Since the inception of the Zionist movement at the turn of the 20th century, the leading Gedolei Torah of each successive generation has rejected any identification with Zionism. So that is part of the beginning and end of, you can't participate in the election, can't vote for Eretz HaKodesh. That's been his position in 2020. That's his position in 2025. So in a book that he wrote about contemporary times, it's called The Eye of the Storm, A Calm View on Raging Issues. He has a comment about Zionism, or just one sentence from that in source number 8. It is out of love for the Jewish people that I found it necessary to expose the vacuity of Zionist ideology. Right. So this was, he's presenting his worldview, which is very much that Zionism is a bad idea. Whether it was because of the secularists who founded it, or the state that is not completely run in Torah values. I did not read the book. I read the review of the book, and I read the review because this was a very famous exchange between Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein and Rabbi Feldman in the pages of Jewish Action, the OU's magazine, in 2010. And Rabbi Lichtenstein wrote a review of Rabbi Feldman's The Eye of the Storm. And it turns out that Rabbi Lichtenstein and Rabbi Feldman were classmates back in their yeshiva days. He remembers being students at Talmudical Academy of Baltimore back in the early 1940s. They were classmates. Rabbi Lichtenstein spent time with Rabbi Feldman's home. So there was a personal relationship to build upon. Suffice it to say, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, educated at the Yeshiva University in Harvard, a Talmud teacher and head of the Kollel at YU before going to co-found Har Etzion, the Gush Yeshiva in Israel, Hesder Yeshiva, who has authored numerous books and articles in addition to his Torah scholarship on religious Zionism, on Hesder and the like. He's someone from the more YU community who has cast his lot in Israel. Is someone who's on the more religious Zionist slate. So it doesn't take a genius to guess that he's going to disagree strongly with Rabbi Feldman. But it's an interesting to see the exchange and the fact that you're not talking about people who live on opposite ends of the earth and never interacted with each other. Here you have people with very different religious Jewish ideologies who were educated together, who spent time together, who had a relationship together, and are now addressing each other publicly in the modern Orthodox press, the Jewish Action, about a book that Rabbi Feldman rejects Zionism and Rabbi Lichtenstein certainly supports it. And so we pointed this out before, that for Rabbi Feldman we get one sentence and we know he's opposed to Zionism. Rabbi Lichtenstein doesn't generally write or speak that way. It requires a little bit more of an expansion. Anyone who's ever heard him speak, besides the fact, it probably is certainly why it made sense that he got his PhD in English literature from Harvard, that he doesn't speak directly. You have to get the whole flowery piece. So that's why you have almost a whole page of Lichtenstein and 2 lines of Rabbi Feldman. That's just in order to convey some of the exchange. So, and yet I remain befuddled, source 9. Let me say flatly and clearly that on this front, as on several others, I share Rabbi Feldman's vision and his priorities. Right? We both study Torah. Fundamentally, we grew up with similar values and have both retained and intensified our commitment to Torah values and their places in personal communal life. Still, or perhaps therefore I ask, I wanted in this direction, is it indeed desirable or even possible to engage in a foray of utter denial of Jewish work to what the Zionist enterprise, albeit regarded as monolith behemoth, hath wrought? May we be so radically judgmental as we deplore certain atlases and religious motivation to result? It is the reclamation of Eretz Yisrael accompanied by gradual progress towards Rov Yisrael Jewishly neutral. Can we blandly overlook the infant country's commitment to Klita, arguably the most monumental initiative post-biblical chesed, as if only atheists and Christians value caritas? Right? There may be warts within Zionism, but how can you, basically say and write it off as vacuous? I presume that I'm not the only reader who would have preferred a more balanced and judicious critique to the rancor that at times fills the pages with total denigration of Zionism. Something to the effect that Zionism, the state it had established, had contributed much to the character of Jewish life, and much of its vision and reality remains woefully deficient. So Torah Jewry needs to strive creatively and, if necessary, to fight vigorously in order to restore our full commitment to our national heritage. Some recognition of religious Zionist claims regarding divine assistance would be far too much to expect, and for this purpose, not crucial. What I suggest is substantively, not just tactically, would still be quite meaningful, however. I believe this formulation approaches the views of the Panovich Rav. This is Rabbi Kahaneman, founder of the Panovich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak, as I knew him, who he feels had a more pragmatic approach to Zionism. I also recall that when a Rosh Yeshiva from a prominent anti-Zionist Torah family was taken to a tour of Yamit, which was where Israel's Yishuv in the Sinai when Israel controlled it. He remarked with intuitive admiration, perhaps with flashes of memories of Eastern Europe, just see what the Jews have accomplished here. Right? He was impressed by the Zionist endeavor, even if he was completely anti-Zionist. And I hope that an analogous response could continue to fill a capacious Torah heart today. And then finally, if I may close, I open on a personal note. Dear Rabbi Aaron, must the walls that separate our communities and our institutions soar quite so high, the interposing moat plunge quite so deep? Shall we never sled again? He's recalling how they used to sled back in their TA Baltimore days. So it's just an interesting exchange, both because it highlights some very serious and absolute opposition to Zionism from a prominent voice in the yeshiva world, extending the Moetzes Gedolei Torah, which it might be easier for us to think of as not in our language from anyone who interacts with people in our community, but we see Rav Lichtenstein completely rejecting that approach, but still recognizing that it shouldn't be such an open, is there no common ground? And even within the ultra-Orthodox community, there is, we saw before that there are those who feel you could vote in the World Zionist Congress elections. And there are those who feel that even, for example, Rabbi Feldman is not nuanced enough. So Rabbi Yair Hoffman, who's a prominent author and spokesperson in the more yeshiva community, writes often in the various periodicals in the community. So he has an op-ed in source number 10 that came out back in the end of March. Rabbi Feldman cites various historical examples of rabbinic opposition to Zionism, including statements from the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, Rabbi Chanan Wasser. Right, he marshals some of the great names in the yeshiva world. However, the historical record, particularly after the rise of the state of Israel, reveals a more complex picture than uniform opposition. He says it's not black and white. And just as an example of how after in the early days of the state, after 1948, it was not black and white, Rabbi Shimshon Nadel has an article about the Israeli elections from the Jerusalem Post. And he says, before the election of the first Knesset in January 1949, a number of leading rabbis issued a kol koreh, right? That's the rabbinic comment, proclamation, urging the flock to participate, stating that it was a mitzvah to vote. The Belzer Rebbe, Rabbi Aaron Rokach, was approached by one of his Hasidim who said, is it really a mitzvah? Is it like a mitzvah like eating matzah? The Belzer Rebbe thought for a moment and then quipped, no, maybe more a mitzvah like eating maror, right? Meaning, you hold your nose and you do it. Or it's bitter, but you do it anyway. In a response written in 1916, Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Kook defends the creation of a modern democratic state in Israel, even without a king or Sanhedrin. Kook argues that in the absence of a Sanhedrin or a prophet, a king can be appointed by consent of the Jewish nation. He continues, when there is no king, since the laws of the government concern the general welfare of the nation, the rights of government return to the nation. He says that there's halachic value or halachic legitimacy or halachic standing to a democratically elected government. According to Rav Kook, the Jewish people have the right to self-determination, have the authority to create a government at all times. He goes as far as saying that any lawmaker that arises in Israel has a status of king concerning governing the state. Right? This relates to the concept we've spoken about before, dina damachusa dina. The law of the land is the law that is imbued with a certain type of religious significance in this case. Based on the above, it would appear that according to Kook, electing a body to govern the Jewish nation is indeed a fulfillment of the mitzvah to appoint a king. There's a mitzvah to vote. There's a mitzvah to participate in the Israeli election. And this is kind of recognizes the nuance that it wasn't just the Zionists who were involved in seeing positive value in participating in this exercise of democracy in the state of Israel, or by extension, the World Zionist Organization. It's not open and shut, and therefore there is a strong basis, argues Rabbi Hoffman, and those in the Eretz HaKodesh slate for ultra-Orthodox Haredi yeshivish participation in these elections. So that's some of the ideological background in this, and we see it breaking again on familiar party lines. The ultra-Orthodox are negative, the modern Orthodox religious Zionists are more positive, and we have many, even in the more traditionalist camp, who still see a positive. In particular, if you look further into the literature, the establishment of the state of Israel was definitely a game changer, and even we see developing even further today. This came up in our discussion of the Haredi draft and the changes in the ultra-Orthodox community. As time goes by and Israel changes, Israel doesn't really have the same flavor of being an outlier or a diaspora type of a country. The founding fathers were all originally Eastern European, and then you have big immigration from the Middle East into Israel. Now you have a more Israeli identity for everyone in Israel that's changing some of the views, and that's also shifting how even American Jews are looking at it, in particular a shift in the more ultra-Orthodox community. Questions, comments before we pivot over in terms of, let's say, reject the Jerusalem program, and then just talk a little bit about a election, honesty in the election. All right. I hope I hope that at the very least everyone voted. And if not, make sure you do. All right. So Rabbi Hoffman, when he was responding to the those who opposed voting in these elections, so pointed out, what about the fact that people would have to agree, like this, go back to the Moetzes Gedolei Torah, back to source number 3. You're supporting the army, you're supporting a secular Zionism. Yeah, it's too much to accept. So source number 12, Rabbi Hoffman writes, as far as the question of the particular language that one must accept in order to vote, nowhere is it written that one must accept the intent that an author had in mind when something was written. Right? They wrote all this and want you to accept it, but those are their words. And as for that, a voter must support national service for those not in the army. There are many types of national service, including chesed and reciting brachos. There's no special mitzvah to adhere to the intent of those who wrote the document. Right? The document is an amalgamation of different ideas anyway. So it says you support the IDF or support national service. So when you check off the program, you're supporting national service. So what national service do you mean? Well, guess what? Saying brachos is a spiritual good for the people. So that's national service too. He's invoking a little bit of creative interpretation. Some would say a little bit of what the Talmud calls palginan dibure. You can divide up your words. There's a whole discussion in reaction to this. Is an article that I read that highlights the response of Yaakov to Yitzchak. Right? Yaakov is dressed up as Esav and appears before his father Yitzchak to receive the blessings. Yitzchak is suspicious. Sounds like Yaakov, feels like Esav, and he says, "Are you, Esav, my firstborn?" And he just says, "I am." And the commentaries say he didn't say, "I am Esav." He says, "I am." Or when he first comes in, he says to him, "Who are you, my son?" He says, "Anochi Esav bichorecha." I am, Esav is your firstborn. Is how a number of the Mefarshim understand this. This is the idea that trying to minimize any type of dishonesty involved in Yaakov's standing before Yitzchak. There's certainly a machlokas about this. Rashi quotes the Midrash about this. There are other early commentaries who talk about this. There are those like Ibn Ezra who completely reject this. It's like, why are you putting in commas? Why are you trying to change the intent? But in some ways, that's what Rabbi Hoffman is doing. He's kind of saying, as we gave the example earlier on, you have all the terms of service, you don't even read them, and you click accept. I accept. Whatever it is, I'm accepting. If I don't know what it is, it's also okay. If I disagree with something, I'm generally accepting. However you want to kind of apologize for it, that's what's going on here. So the idea of remember, Rabbi Hoffman is trying to respond to those who say you can't vote in these elections because by voting in these elections, you're identifying with anti-Torah, anti-traditional ideas, values, and even steps. So you can't vote because you have to accept that. For example, even the idea that there's a discussion. Can you? We've talked about this also previously. Can you lie about being a Jew? This is especially especially in times of persecution. What happens if someone asks you if you're a Jew or not? So you have to, if you feel fear for your life, what should you do? So here, it's certainly not as a monumental decision-making, but, Rabbi Hoffman says, like many, it's more pro forma, so maybe there's flexibility, and we certainly have some traditional Jewish sources to back that up. None of them giving license to lie, but sometimes we're not necessarily being as specific. And there are also certain discussions in the Talmud about various, if a person takes certain oaths thinking one thing as opposed to other people thinking another, how that plays itself out. So Rabbi Hoffman's response is, don't let the Jerusalem program turn you off from voting one way or the other. You accept, you vote, and in our case, we vote OIC. So then, what about especially this year? There's been scandals. And this is an article just from yesterday, the Jewish News Syndicate, source 13. U.S.-based elections for the World Zionist Congress 2025 have been engulfed in scandal. Weeks after approximately 2,000 votes were tossed out due to voting irregularities in the running for the so-called Parliament of the Jewish People, More incidents of improprieties have been discovered. The U.S. Area Election Committee, which oversees the American portion of the WZC election, identified thousands of additional suspicious votes according to media report. The committee has not publicly identified the slate or slates that benefited from these votes, nor the process used to cast them, and audit is likely to take place and delay the certification of the election results due to the percentage of ballots now either discarded or in dispute. However, the American Zionist movement said the irregular votes that we have identified represent only a small fraction of the votes cast. The committee is continuing its investigation. The election committee's own internal monitoring that initially detected these issues, and through our ongoing investigation, additional irregular votes have been identified. We remain absolutely committed to upholding the integrity of the election and ensuring that no improper votes will be counted. It added, noting that a record turnout is expected. As of April 15th, nearly 124,000 votes have been cast, already surpassing the 2020 total. So there's a lot of elections, and there's the fact that there's a lot of this. Technology is such that the same way we hear about the abuse of technology with bots and fake accounts and the like in other aspects of life, especially in social media and the like, there's certainly that potential. It highlights a few things. One, the interest in this Congress of the Jewish Parliament of the Jewish people, as well highlights that there are stakes, and just we're not so far away from the elections here back in November or in previous years where there's been dispute about elections, to recognize that there's always there's going to be some form of dispute, and unfortunately some malfeasance and some abuse. So do we have any type of halachic discussions about it? In general, we're not, obviously that lying and falsehood are completely forbidden, but how have these issues been dealt with within the Jewish communal or halachic system? So Rabbi Yaakov Sasporta, 17th century rabbi, source 14. If those appointed over the communities receive their appointment legitimately, I would be silent lest I injure their dignity. However, those who took their appointment by means of their money and rise to glory by means of paying the lords of the land, taking vacant positions irrespective of whether they're suited or not, of this it is said that money will answer for all. Kesef Yanes, I'll call it, is evil that cannot be mended. Most are of this type. He bemoans the fact that sometimes wrong people get elected because you can buy elections and the like. And this is, he's not identifying any specific rule or regulation. He just calls this evil. And the Ramah, when talking about elections, because in general, as we saw referenced before by Rav Kook, the idea of an election has a certain standing in Jewish in Jewish law, in Jewish community, in Jewish government, and in particular, we've seen this applied in Jewish history for communal matters. The idea of there being, the leaders of the community who were elected, or the judges, religious judges being appointed, or rabbis being appointed. These sometimes have had elections, and these has precedent through the Middle Ages, through the modern times. So there's halachic literature on the subject. So in addressing this, Rabbi Moshe Isulis, source 15, with the matter, the community is not able to be in agreement about all the heads of the household that pay taxes, or be in agreement. If there's a matter that the community cannot be in agreement about, all the heads of households that pay taxes should convene and accept upon themselves that each one will proclaim his opinion for the sake of heaven, and they'll go according to the majority. And if the minority refuses to go along, the majority can force them to comply. So, basically, the Ramah is applying the rules of rov, of majority, right? We have that in the Torah for the way when the judges decide, acharei rabim lahatos. We follow the majority. Well, we follow the majority on communal issues as well. Just, a couple of interesting caveats that have to be expanded upon in practical terms, right? All the households that pay taxes, right? There was a certain type of membership. There are certain voting requirements. Not everyone gets a vote. There are going to be certain requirements. And of course, if the minority doesn't like it, right? Too bad, right? The majority can force the minority to comply. But in particular, just one line which stands out is when they take this vote, how is the vote supposed to be? How are the votes supposed to be cast? That each one proclaim his opinion for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim. And this is not just this is the idea that these laws have aspiration, that this is supposed to be done honestly and with integrity and for the right reasons. take that back to 14, where he doesn't believe in wrong candidates getting elected. Too often the elections, even his time, were purchased by those who were not qualified. And that is this idea that when we have these votes and we take these votes, it should be l'shem shamayim. And as Rabbi Yoshua Pfeffer has noted in an article about voting in elections in halacha, if both voters and those who voted into office perform their respective duties for the sake of heaven and not out of personal and narrow interests, our world would surely be a far better place, right? Halavai, sometimes, politics gets in the way. Maybe we could say a little bit naive, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't aspire for the right approach and the right standards being followed and the like. Just as a caveat, Rabbi Yoshua Pfeffer, someone we've mentioned before, has a wonderful newsletter called Tzarich Iyun, where he tackles a lot of issues pertaining to Israel today, including the role of the ultra-Orthodox community and the blending and binding of Israeli society. I'm not sure who he's voting for, what slate he's in. He's just someone interesting to read. So we have seen that, just like there's a mitzvah to vote, participate in democracy and elections in general, the participation in WCC elections is also part of our religious obligation in terms of representing our values, what's near and dear to us. There could be a difference of opinion, and there are different views and philosophies represented in the slates of the WCC elections, including those within from the more ultra-Orthodox, anti-Zionist, those who rejected Zionism and say you shouldn't vote, but many constituents of that community wanting to get involved. And hopefully this takes us in a positive direction. Hopefully the elections continue. Just a couple of days left. I think you have until midnight on May 4th before it turns into May 5th. But everyone here, please vote. Please tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to vote as well. And all of this is especially has to recognize this is a result of there being a state of Israel, an opportunity for Jews around the world to participate in that. And hopefully, as Rabbi Pfeffer says, hopefully we do everything, in the words of the Ramah, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, our world will surely be in a far better place. So I'm not going to say vote early, vote often, but vote early, tell other people to vote. And everyone should have a meaningful Yom HaZikaron and a celebratory Yom HaAtzmaut.